Just before Christmas, my daughter-in-law coldly said, "Don't come to the lake house this year. We want to keep it for our own family." My late wife and I had built that home with our life savings and our own hands. But when I returned in secret, I discovered her keepsakes had been cleared away. The house was already being torn apart, and my son was using forged documents to mortgage my property and save his in-laws' failing company. I didn't argue. I pretended I would sign. On Christmas Eve, they threw a celebration, until I walked in with my attorney and the police. Before we go further, thank you for being here. Dad family revenge stories like this one exist because of viewers like you. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I read every single one. Some fictional elements have been added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside this story is one worth keeping. The wreath smelled like pine and cinnamon, exactly the way Margaret always made it smell. I had found it that morning in the storage closet tucked behind a box of ornaments I hadn't opened in 2 years. The moment I lifted it off the shelf, my chest tightened so hard I had to set it down and press my hand against the wall just to steady myself. 6 years. 6 years since she had hung this same wreath on the kitchen window, humming something soft under her breath while the soup simmered on the stove. 6 years, and the scent of it could still knock the air right out of me. I carried it to the kitchen and stood on a step stool, looping the wire hook over the curtain rod the way she used to. Outside, the Sacramento sky had gone a deep, bruised gray. December had arrived the way it always did, quietly, without asking. That was when my phone rang. I didn't check the screen. I climbed down, dried my hands on a dish towel, and answered, "Dad." It was Sylvia. Her voice was bright, the way a hotel lobby is bright, clean, controlled, and completely empty of warmth. "I just wanted to give you a heads up about Christmas. You don't need to make the drive up to the lake house this year. Owen thinks it would be better for everyone if we kept it as just our immediate family." I gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles went white before I even realized it. "Our immediate family," I said. "Who exactly does that include?" She said, "Well, us, the kids, and my parents. They're flying in from Los Angeles, so they'll need somewhere comfortable to stay." She paused, then added as if the thought had just occurred to her, "You're in Sacramento, Dad. It's so much easier for you to just stay home." Behind her voice, I heard something that made my stomach drop, the high whine of a power drill, and then a man's voice, low and certain, saying, "After the holidays, we demo this section first." My throat went dry. That wasn't the sound of people decorating for Christmas. That was the sound of a construction crew. "Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could manage, "that is my house." Her tone shifted, still polite but with a new edge underneath it, thin and sharp as a wire. "Dad, we all know that. But eventually the house will be Owen's anyway. We're using it a little early. It's not a big deal." Before I could respond, she said, "I have to go. We'll talk soon." And the line went dead. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, staring at the wreath hanging in the window, the pine and cinnamon smell that had felt like comfort. 20 minutes ago now felt like something else entirely, like a reminder of everything that could be taken from a person while they were standing right in their own home. I set the phone face down on the counter. Then I noticed the envelope. It had arrived that morning, a plain white rectangle with a Los Angeles return address I didn't recognize. I had set it aside, figuring it was a bill or some holiday solicitation. Now I picked it up and slid my finger under the flap. The letter was from an attorney named Gerard Whitfield, representing Owen and Sylvia Calloway. The language was professional, almost gentle. It explained that my son and daughter-in-law wished to formalize the transfer of the Lake Tahoe property into their names before the end of the calendar year. It requested my signature on the enclosed documents no later than December 24th. The last paragraph stopped me cold. It noted that my failure to cooperate could regrettably create complications regarding my access to my grandchildren during the upcoming holiday season and beyond. My hands were trembling so badly that the paper rustled in my grip. My eyes burned not with tears, not yet, but with something hotter than that. I read the paragraph again and again. Each time the words stayed exactly the same. They were using my grandchildren as a threat. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and set it on the kitchen table. Then I pulled out the chair where Margaret used to sit every Christmas Eve to wrap presents, the one with the cushion she had recovered herself, because she said the original was an offense to anyone with eyes, and I sat down in it instead. Outside, the first snow of December began to fall over Sacramento. Fine, dry flakes drifting past the kitchen window, past the wreath, past the smell of pine and cinnamon. I sat there for a long time, not panicking, not defeated, thinking. Margaret had a way of making every decision sound like it had been obvious all along. 6 acres, she said, standing at the edge of the property, with her boots sinking into the soft earth beside Lake Tahoe. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were so bright it almost hurt to look at her directly. Thomas, 6 acres overlooking that water. Tell me you see it. I see it, I said. I also see 20 years of mortgage payments. She laughed, that full, unguarded laugh that started somewhere deep in her chest and came out like it had been waiting all week for permission. You are the least romantic engineer in the state of California. I'm a realistic engineer, I said. There's a difference. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the tree line, pointing at a flat stretch of land where the ground leveled off before the slope dropped toward the water. Right here. The house goes right here. Big kitchen windows facing the lake. A porch wide enough for 2 chairs and a table. And down there, she pointed toward a natural curve in the shoreline. I want hydrangeas, blue ones, all the way along the bank. I looked at her standing there in the afternoon light. Her dark hair pulled back, one hand shading her eyes, the other still holding mine, and I thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that I was the luckiest man in California. Realistic or not, we broke ground in the spring of 1998. I designed the structure myself. Load-bearing walls, floor joists, roof pitch, calculated 3 times over because I refused to pay someone else to do math I could do in my sleep. Margaret handled everything I couldn't calculate. She chose the window casings and the kitchen tile and the color of every door. She spent 2 full weekends driving between lumber yards, comparing wood finishes for the floors, holding paint chips up to the light, until she found the exact tone she called honest oak. What does that even mean? I asked her. It means it looks like what it actually is, she said, not pretending to be anything fancier. That October, Owen was 10 years old and Nora was 7. On the first weekend, the floors were finished. Both of them ran inside ahead of us in their socked feet and slid from the front door all the way to the back wall, shrieking the whole way. Margaret pressed her hand over her mouth to hide her smile, but her shoulders were shaking with laughter she couldn't hold back. That Christmas, Owen and I knelt together at the bottom of the staircase with a pocket knife and carved our names into the wood on the underside of the lowest step, low enough that you'd only see it if you were looking. Thomas and Margaret Christmas, 1998. Owen had insisted on adding both our names, not just his own. It's their house too, he said with the absolute certainty of a 10-year-old who has never once doubted that the people he loves will always be there. I pressed the knife into his small hand and helped him guide it through the letters. Margaret stood at the top of the stairs watching us. When Owen looked up and said, "Mom, come see," she walked down, slowly bent low, and ran her finger along the carved lines. Her throat moved. She didn't say anything for a moment. She pressed her lips together hard, the way she did when she was trying to hold something in. "Don't you dare cry, Margaret Ann," I told her. "I'm not crying," she said, and her voice only broke a little. "I just didn't know it was going to feel like this." "Like what?" She looked up at me and her eyes were full. "Like it's actually ours. We lost her 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate and doesn't wait. One spring, she was planting her hydrangeas along the bank, and by the following winter, she was gone. The hydrangeas came back every year without her. I never pulled them out. After she died, Owen and Sylvia started coming to the lake house for the holidays. I encouraged it. I wanted the grandchildren to know the place, to run on those same floors in their socked feet, to eat Christmas breakfast at the table where their grandmother used to sit. I thought keeping the house alive with family was the closest thing I had left to keeping her alive too. The last time Margaret and I sat together on that porch, she took my hand and said, "Promise me you'll keep it. Not for the money, for the mornings." "I promise," I told her. Sitting in her chair in my Sacramento kitchen, with her wreath in the window and a lawyer's letter on the table, I pressed my fingers against the wood grain of the armrest, the same armrest her hand had worn smooth over 20 years of Sunday mornings, and I made myself remember exactly what I had promised, and exactly who had asked me to keep it. I had not slept. By 5 in the morning, I had made 2 pots of coffee, read the attorney's letter 4 more times, and sat at the kitchen table long enough to watch the Sacramento sky go from black to gray to the pale, washed-out white of a December dawn. At some point, I had taken Margaret's wreath down from the window and set it on the counter beside me, not because I meant to, just because I needed something to hold on to. My phone buzzed at 6:52. Roy Decker. I picked up before the second ring. Thomas. Roy's voice was the same as it had been for 30 years, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors and saw no reason to rush anything that didn't involve a structural failure. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to tell me straight. Are you doing renovation work up at the lake house?" My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the edge of the table. "No," I said. "Why?" I heard him exhale long and slow the way he did, when he already knew the answer wasn't going to be good. Roy had lived on the north shore of Lake Tahoe for 31 years. He was the man who had helped me set the ridge beam on the lake house roof back in the summer of 1998. The two of us up there in the heat with a borrowed crane and a 6-pack of cold Coors, arguing about the pitch angle, until Margaret shouted up from the yard that if we didn't agree in the next 10 minutes, she was hiring someone who would. Roy was the closest thing I had to a neighbor out there, and he took that seriously. "I've been seeing trucks," he said. "Construction trucks. Big ones with a logo on the side. Hargrove Construction out of Los Angeles. Been coming and going for 2 days now. Yesterday I counted 4 of them at once." The name hit me like a fist to the chest. Hargrove. Preston Hargrove. Sylvia's father. Roy. I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "What else did you see?" Hold on. I heard him moving the creak of a door. "I took some pictures yesterday afternoon when they were hauling stuff out. Let me send them over." My phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. I pulled up the photos with fingers that had gone completely numb. The first image showed 2 flatbed trucks parked in my driveway, loaded with what looked like my outdoor furniture. The teak chairs Margaret had picked out, the side tables, the big planters she had used for her hydrangeas. stacked and strapped down like cargo. The second image made my jaw clench so hard, my back teeth ached. A large wooden sign had been driven into the ground at the edge of my property, right beside the entrance to the driveway. Bold letters, freshly painted, with a small architectural rendering in the corner, showing something that looked nothing at all like the house Margaret and I had built. Hargrove Lake Estate, a premier luxury development coming soon. Hargrove Development Group, Los Angeles, CA. The third image was the one that made my hands start shaking. It showed the front face of my house and two of the original windows, the ones Margaret had spent 3 weeks choosing with the wide casings and the divided lights she had called, the ones that actually look like a home, had already been removed. Bare framing where the glass used to be, tarp flapping loose in the December wind. Thomas. Roy's voice came back on the line, careful and quiet. Talk to me. They're tearing it apart, I said. The words tasted like ash. Roy, they're already tearing it apart. I figured something was wrong, he said. That's why I called. I almost drove over there yesterday to ask those guys what was going on, but I thought I'd better talk to you first. You did the right thing. I stood up from the table. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, like the floor had developed a slight but persistent tilt. Don't go over there. Don't talk to them. What are you going to do? I looked at Margaret's wreath sitting on the counter. The pine smell had faded a little overnight, but the cinnamon was still there, faint and stubborn the way she had always been. I'm going to drive up there, I said. But not on the main road. Roy was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then he said, You want me to leave the side gate unlocked, the one at the back of my property, where the trail runs down to the water? Yes, I said. Don't tell anyone. Thomas. His voice dropped lower. Whatever's happening up there, you built that house. Don't let anybody make you forget that. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I stood in my kitchen in the gray December morning light and looked at the photographs one more time. My teak chairs strapped to a flatbed. My windows ripped out of their frames. My driveway carrying trucks that belonged to a man who had smiled at my dinner table for 6 years. I poured the rest of my coffee down, the drain, grabbed my keys, and walked out to the car. The drive to Lake Tahoe from Sacramento runs northeast on Interstate 80, climbing out of the valley and up through the Sierra Nevada foothills before the mountains close in on both sides, and the elevation starts to take your breath if you're not paying attention. Margaret and I had driven that road more times than I could count windows down in summer chains, on in winter always stopping at the same gas station in Auburn, where she insisted the coffee was better than anywhere else on the highway. I didn't stop in Auburn that morning. I drove straight through, both hands on the wheel, watching the first dusting of snow appear on the hillsides above 4,000 feet. And I thought about the letter sitting on my kitchen table, and the sign planted in my driveway, and the sound of a power drill I had heard in the background of Sylvia's phone call the night before. They had not waited for my answer. They had not expected to need one. What I'm about to share, I spent a long time wishing I had never seen it. Before I do, tell me you're still here. Comment, I'm with you, below. It takes 2 seconds and it means more than you know. This story includes some fictional details added for educational purposes. It may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If you'd rather not continue, you're welcome to step away right here. Roy's gate was unlocked exactly as he'd promised. I left my car on the gravel pull-off behind his property and went the rest of the way on foot, following the trail that ran along the waterline through a corridor of ponderosa pines. The ground was frozen solid underfoot, and a thin layer of snow had settled into the spaces between the roots, white and unblemished. Nobody had walked this path recently except the deer. That was exactly what I needed. I smelled the house before I saw it. Fresh-cut lumber, adhesive, the sharp chemical bite of something industrial that had no business being on a property where Margaret had once hung lavender sachets from every door handle because she said a house should smell like it meant something. I stopped at the tree line maybe 40 yards back and looked. The exterior lights had been replaced. The simple coach lanterns Margaret had picked out were gone, substituted with something modern and cold that threw harsh yellow light across the snow. At least 8 vehicles crowded the driveway and spilled onto the grass. Through the large front windows, I could see movement, hear the low blur of voices and music. I moved along the tree line until I reached the side of the house where the kitchen windows faced the lake. I crouched low behind the old juniper hedge, the one Margaret and I had planted the second summer, because she said every house needed something green that stayed green all winter, and I looked inside. The furniture was unrecognizable. Every piece Margaret and I had chosen over 20 years had been cleared out and replaced with staged showroom pieces in gray and chrome. The photographs that had lined the mantelpiece Owen's first day of school, Nora at her college graduation, Margaret and me on the dock the summer we finished the house, were gone. In their place hung large, abstract canvases in corporate blues and whites, and on the dining table beneath the chandelier, Margaret had special ordered from a glassblower in Truckee sat an architectural model of something I had never designed and never agreed to build. 3 stories, 10 bedrooms by the look of it. An indoor pool rendered in blue resin, a private dock extending into the lake where our old wooden one currently stood. My stomach turned over so violently I had to press one hand flat against the bark of the juniper just to stay steady. Then I saw Nora. She was sitting at the far end of the dining table, a glass of red wine in her hand, studying the architectural model with an expression I could not fully read from where I stood. She wasn't laughing, she wasn't celebrating, but she was there, my daughter, who had not called me, who had not warned me, who was sitting inside my house, looking at a model of the building that was meant to replace it. My throat tightened so sharply it hurt. Before I could process what I was seeing, Preston Hargrove stepped into the center of the room. I had met Preston exactly 41 times over the course of Owen and Sylvia's marriage. I had shaken his hand at the wedding-shared Thanksgiving tables with him, listened to him talk about real estate markets and investment cycles with the absolute confidence of a man who had never once been told he was wrong about anything. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tan you only get from too much time on golf courses, and he moved through every room as though he had personally approved its dimensions. He moved through my living room the same way now. "Demo the old structure," he said, pointing at the model with his wine glass, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. "And we break ground on the main residence by March. The bank releases the first construction draw the moment the transfer paperwork is recorded. 12 months to completion, 18 at the outside." Owen stood near the fireplace, my fireplace, the one I had laid stone by stone over 3 weekends in October of 2001 because I refused to pay a mason's markup. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his jaw was set in a way I recognized. It was the expression he used to get as a teenager when he had already made a decision he knew wasn't right, and was working very hard to convince himself otherwise. "What if Dad pushes back?" Owen asked. Preston waved his hand as though the question were a minor inconvenience, like a slow driver in the fast lane. "He's 63 years old, and he lives alone. He's not going to take his own son to court over a property dispute. We establish facts on the ground first. Once demolition begins, his options narrow considerably." Then Preston reached into the leather portfolio on the table and produced a document. He set it in front of Owen with the careful deliberateness of a man who had been waiting for this moment. "The power of attorney," he said. "It states that Thomas Calloway has demonstrated diminished capacity to manage his own financial affairs. Dr. Fitch has already signed the medical certification. All it needs is your signature as his designated representative. Owen picked up the document. He read it. I could see his eyes moving across the page line by line slowly. His fingers pressed white against the edges of the paper. His jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing on something that tasted wrong. He stood there for what felt like a very long time. Then he picked up the pen and signed his name. I watched my son do it. I watched his hand move across the paper, certain and deliberate, and I felt something shift inside my chest, not breaking, not yet, but changing. The way a load-bearing wall sounds just before it gives. A low, structural groan that nobody else in the room could hear. I turned away from the window before anyone could look up and see me standing there. On the way back to Roy's gate, I passed the garage. The side door was unlocked. It always had been because Margaret had lost the key sometime in 2004, and we had never bothered to replace it. I stepped inside, and in the thin gray light filtering through the single window, I found what I was looking for on the workbench. A small piece of oak, maybe 6 inches long, that I had cut from the underside of the staircase bottom step during my last visit in October. I had meant to take it home then, just to have a piece of the house with me. I had forgotten it on the bench. I picked it up and turned it over. The carved letters were still sharp. Thomas and Margaret, Christmas, 1998. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket close to my chest and walked back to my car through the snow. Diana Mercer had been my attorney for 19 years, and in that time I had watched her deliver bad news to people the way a surgeon delivers a diagnosis clearly, directly, with no ornamental softening that might let you believe things were better than they were. She had handled Margaret's estate. She had reviewed every contract I signed after retirement. She was the person I called when I needed to know the truth, because Diana did not deal in comfortable versions of it. Her assistant showed me in at 8:15 without an appointment, which told me Diana had already seen my name on the missed call log from the night before and had left instructions. She was standing at her window when I walked in, coffee in hand, looking out at the gray Sacramento morning. She turned when she heard me, took one look at my face, and said, "Sit down, Thomas. Start from the beginning." I sat. I told her everything: the call from Sylvia, the attorney's letter, with its threat about my grandchildren, Roy's photographs, the sign in my driveway, the windows already pulled from their frames. I told her about standing in the snow outside my own house and watching my son sign a document that said his father had lost his mind. By the time I finished, Diana had set her coffee down and was writing on a yellow legal pad with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. "The deed," she said without looking up. "You have it with you." I slid the folder across her desk. She opened it, reviewed the property deed, the original purchase agreement, the title insurance policy. Her eyes moved quickly, efficiently, the way they always did when she was building something in her head. "Clear title," she said. "Sole ownership, no liens, no encumbrances. Thomas, nobody can sell, mortgage, or demolish this property without your written consent. That's unambiguous." She set the deed aside and picked up the attorney's letter. She read it twice. When she looked up, her expression had sharpened considerably. "The threat regarding your grandchildren," she said. "I want to be direct with you about this because I know it hit you hard. Grandparent visitation rights in California are extremely limited by law. Courts will not restrict a grandparent's access to grandchildren simply because a property dispute exists. This paragraph was written to frighten you, Thomas. It is not a legal threat. It is an emotional one." Something loosened slightly in my chest. Not relief exactly, but the particular release that comes from having a fear named out loud and found smaller than you thought. "Now," Diana said, and her voice dropped half a register, Let me show you what I found this morning before you arrived. She turned her monitor toward me. On the screen was a document from the Placer County Recorder's Office, the official land records database for the Lake Tahoe region. I pulled the records on your property first thing this morning, she said. There is a power of attorney on file, Thomas, recorded 6 weeks ago. It grants Owen Calloway full authority to manage and transfer your real property assets on the basis that you have demonstrated diminished cognitive capacity. The room felt like it tilted. 6 weeks ago, I said. November 9th, she said. While you were having Sunday dinners and taking phone calls from your son asking how you were feeling. My hands pressed flat against my thighs so hard I could feel the seams of my pants cutting into my palms. 6 weeks. Owen had been building this for 6 weeks carefully, systematically, while calling me every Sunday evening to ask about my garden and my knee and whether I had gotten the furnace serviced before winter. The notary stamp, Diana continued tapping the screen. I've already sent it to a document examiner I work with, but I can tell you from looking at it that the registration number doesn't match any active notary in Placer or Sacramento County. Thomas, the stamp is fraudulent. Under California law, a forged notary seal on a real estate document is a separate criminal offense, notary fraud, under Penal Code Section 470. That is on top of the Elder Financial Abuse statute. She said the phrase, elder financial abuse, with the same flat precision she used for everything, but I felt it land differently than I expected. Not as an insult, as a category, as the legal name for the thing my son had agreed to do to me. What do we do? I asked. We build the case carefully, Diana said. We do not tip them off. We do not confront Owen or Sylvia or Preston Hargrove directly. We gather everything and then we act all at once. She paused. You mentioned a security system at the lake house. Cameras, I said. I had a system installed 4 years ago. Owen had the outdoor units disconnected. I noticed it the last time I visited. But there's one camera inside in the study. Small. Mounted in the bookshelf behind a row of architectural books. I paused. I don't think he knew it was there. Diana picked up her phone and dialed. Gary Novak, she said to me while it rang. He's the technician who installed your system. If that camera has been recording, I want him to verify the data integrity before we touch anything. Courts require that kind of chain of custody documentation. I heard the call connect. Diana began talking low and precise. I sat in the chair across from her desk and looked out the window at the Sacramento street below the ordinary Tuesday morning traffic. The coffee shop across the road, with its hand-lettered chalkboard sign, the woman walking a golden retriever, who kept stopping to investigate every crack in the sidewalk. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Completely unaware. I put my hand against the outside of my jacket over the pocket where the piece of carved oak was sitting, and I pressed it there until I could feel the hard edge of it against my palm. Gary Novak arrived at Diana's office 40 minutes later with a hard-sided equipment case and the particular unhurried confidence of a man who has spent 20 years being the person other people call when something goes wrong with a system they don't fully understand. He was 51, stocky, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of permanently calloused hands that come from decades of running cable through walls and ceilings. He was thorough, and he was quiet, and right now, those were the two qualities I needed most. The indoor unit in the study, I told him. Wide-angle lens mounted behind the third shelf on the left side of the bookcase, hidden behind a row of old survey manuals. I don't believe anyone knew it was there. Gary opened his laptop. Motion-activated continuous backup 30-day rolling storage. Login credentials. I recited them from memory. He typed, waited, then turned the screen toward us. The footage library was intact. 30 days time-stamped, organized by date. Gary, Diana said, I need your professional assessment for evidentiary purposes. Has this footage been edited, altered, or interrupted? He studied the metadata panel for 90 seconds, scrolling through file hashes and upload logs. Metadata is clean. File hashes match originals on the server. No gaps indicating deletion or tampering. He looked at Diana. I can provide written certification under California Evidence Code Section 1550. That makes it admissible in court. Do it, Diana said. December 9th. I said, start there. The study appeared in gray-green low-light mode bookshelves, desk, Margaret's old drafting lamp in the corner. Then the door opened, and Owen walked in alone wearing a fleece jacket and work gloves. My throat closed. He moved with purposeful efficiency straight to the shelves, lifting each photograph off its hook, wrapping it in a moving blanket, placing it into a cardboard box. Margaret's face disappeared into the box. Then Owen and Nora as children on the dock. Then Margaret and me on our 25th anniversary, both of us laughing at something Nora had said just off frame. His phone rang. He answered without stopping. The bank's timeline works, he said. If Dad signs by the 24th, the draw releases before year end. Preston covers the January payments. A pause. He's going to sign. Dad always puts the family first. After the demo starts, he won't have a choice anyway. He left. The door closed. The shelves were bare. My hands pressed down on my knees so hard both legs went numb. My jaw ached from clenching. Behind my sternum, the same pressure I had felt the week Margaret died, grief so large, it hasn't yet decided where to put itself. Keep going, I said. Show me the rest. December 13th. Sylvia walked through the study with Preston behind her. Once interior demo is complete, Preston said, this wing gets reconfigured entirely. Study becomes a junior suite. Sylvia picked up the only photograph still on the desk. Margaret and me, 1986, outside the church in Folsom, squinting into the June sun. All this old stuff makes the place look like a nursing home, she said, and set it face down on the desk. Owen stepped into the doorway. He stared at the photograph lying face down, his mouth pressed into a thin, flat line. Something moved behind his eyes, something I could not name from this distance and this terrible remove. He did not pick it up. He turned and walked out. Gary stopped the playback. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose until the burning behind my eyes receded enough to speak. That's my son, I said. My voice came out too low, too careful, like carrying something fragile across an uneven floor. That's my son, and he watched someone put his mother's picture face down on a desk, and he walked away. Diana put her pen down. She did not offer a platitude. She simply waited with the steady witnessing presence of someone who understands that some things need a moment before they can be moved past. What's on the third file? I asked. Gary pulled it up without a word. The third file showed Preston alone in the study on the phone, 3 days before Sylvia had arrived with her renovation plans. He was standing at the window that overlooked the lake, my window, the one I had framed myself, the one Margaret had stood at every morning with her coffee, and he was talking with the relaxed authority of a man conducting a business call from his own office. The medical certification is handled, he said. Fitch signed off yesterday. As far as the county recorder is concerned, Thomas Calloway is no longer competent to manage his own affairs. A pause. He turned slightly, and I could see his profile, the square jaw, the easy confidence, the expression of a man who believes that problems are simply logistics waiting to be organized. The notary situation is handled too. Don't worry about it. Another pause. He smiled at whatever was said on the other end. By Christmas, this property transfers. By February, we break ground. By next December, we're cash flow positive, and the January obligations are covered. He ended the call, slid his phone into his pocket, and stood looking out at the lake for a moment, with his hands clasped behind his back, like a man surveying something that already belonged to him. Gary stopped the playback. The three of us looked at the frozen image on the screen, Preston at my window, hands behind his back, looking at my lake. "Turn it off," I said. My voice came out flat and hard, the way concrete sounds when you tap it, and it's solid all the way through. Gary closed the laptop. Diana was already writing. She had filled 4 pages of her legal pad during the footage, and now she set her pen down and looked at me with the direct, measured expression of someone who has organized her thoughts and is ready to deliver them. "I've been looking into Hargrove Development Group since this morning," she said. "What I'm about to tell you explains why Preston is willing to take the risks he's taking." She opened a second folder on the table. "The company is carrying $2.6 million in outstanding debt. 3 active lawsuits from contractors who have not been paid. Their primary lender placed them on a watch list in October, which means they are 1 missed payment away from the bank exercising its acceleration clause, demanding the entire loan balance immediately." I stared at the papers. "He's about to go under." "He's been going under for 18 months, Diana said. Slowly and quietly, the way these things usually happen before they happen all at once. She slid a single page across the table toward me. "This is where it connects to you directly, Thomas. Look at the name of the largest single creditor in the Hargrove debt file." I looked. Cascade Construction, LLC. General contractors and structural builders. Based in Truckee, California. I felt the blood drain out of my face so quickly that the room seemed to brighten at the edges. "Cascade," I said. That's the crew that built my house. They completed your lake house project in the fall of 1999, Diana said. Preston Hargrove's company used Cascade as a subcontractor on a commercial development in Reno in 2021. They walked away from the project mid-build and left Cascade holding unpaid invoices totaling $412,000. Cascade has had a judgment against Hargrove Development Group ever since. She let that settle for a moment. "Preston has known the value of your Lake Tahoe property for 26 years, Thomas. He knew what it was worth when Cascade built it. He knew what it would be worth now. This was not opportunistic." The word landed in my chest, like a weight being set down on a scale. Not opportunistic. Planned. "The medical certification," I said. "Tell me about Fitch." Diana turned to another page. "Dr. Raymond Fitch, licensed physician, Sacramento County Family Practice. He signed a document certifying that you exhibit significant cognitive decline and are unable to manage complex financial decisions." She looked up. "He has never treated you. You have never been his patient. You have never met this man." My hands curled into fists on my thighs. I could feel my pulse beating hard in my temples, behind my eyes, and the tips of my fingers. "What did he get for it?" I asked. "We don't have documentation yet." Diana said, "But the footage answers that." Preston said the medical certification was handled, and given the pattern here, the most likely arrangement involves Fitch receiving a contract for medical services at the completed resort, the kind of exclusive agreement that would be worth considerably more than any fee he might charge for a standard patient consultation. She set the page down. "We'll subpoena his financial records. Whatever the arrangement was, we'll find it." I stood up. I needed to stand. I walked to the window and looked out at the ordinary Sacramento street below the same coffee shop, the same golden retriever, the same unhurried Tuesday afternoon that had been going on out there while I sat in this room and watched my son box up his mother's face and listened to his father-in-law discuss the logistics of stealing everything I had left. "Diana," I said without turning around. "Can we stop them?" "Yes," she said, and her voice was entirely steady. "But I want to do it correctly. I want every charge to stick, and I want Preston Hargrove to walk out of that lake house on Christmas Eve in front of every investor and business associate he invited to watch his victory, and I want them all to see exactly what he actually is." I turned around. For the first time since Roy's phone call that morning, I felt something in my chest that was not grief and not anger. It was the particular calm that comes when an engineer looks at a failed structure and understands completely and precisely exactly where it went wrong. "Tell me what we need," I said. Diana picked up her pen. "First," she said, "I need to make a phone call to a detective I know in Placer County. I need to step back for a moment. Because while I was sitting in Diana's conference room watching those footage files, there was something else I had not yet told her, a phone call I had made the night before after I drove back from Lake Tahoe with the carved piece of oak in my jacket pocket, and the image of Owen's signature burned into the back of my eyes. I had pulled into my Sacramento driveway at 8:30 in the evening. I sat in the car for 10 minutes without getting out, watching the light in my kitchen window, the one I had left on the one beside Margaret's wreath, and I thought about my daughter. Nora had been at that house, sitting at that table holding a glass of wine, looking at an architectural model of the building that was meant to replace everything her mother and I had built. She had not called me. She had not warned me. And I could not understand why, because Nora, my daughter, the one who had driven 6 hours in a snowstorm to be with me the week Margaret died, the one who called every Sunday without fail and always asked the right questions, was not the kind of person who looked the other way. I called her at 8:43. She picked up on the second ring the way she always did, and her voice came through the phone warm and clear and completely unsuspecting. "Dad. Hey, I was just thinking about you. Are you doing okay?" My throat tightened so hard I had to breathe through it for a second before I could answer. She sounded like herself. She sounded like Nora. She did not sound like someone who was keeping a secret from her father. "I'm fine," I said, which was not even remotely true. "Have you talked to Owen recently?" A brief pause, not guilty, just recollecting. "Yeah, actually. He called me last week." "Why? What did he tell you?" Another pause, slightly longer. "He said you'd been thinking about letting the lake house go. That it was getting to be too much to manage on your own, especially in winter. He said you hadn't told anyone officially yet, but that you seemed... He said you seemed tired, Dad. He said he was worried about you. He asked me not to bring it up with you directly because he didn't want to stress you out. He also told me you'd already approved the new design, that you'd seen the plans, and said it was time for something different. So when I sat there looking at that model, I thought I was looking at something you'd already chosen. He said you'd talk to us when you were ready." The inside of my car felt very small all of a sudden. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. There it was. Owen had called Nora before any of this had surfaced. He had prepared her story first, the gentle, reasonable story of a father getting older, finding the upkeep too much quietly, considering his options. He had made sure that when Nora sat in that living room and looked at that architectural model, she believed she was looking at something her father had already accepted. Something sad, maybe, but not wrong. He had used his sister's love for me as insulation, as a buffer between his actions and any alarm she might have raised. Nora. I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, rough enough that I heard her go still on the other end of the line. Dad, what's going on? I made a decision in that moment. I would not tell her everything over the phone, not from a car in my own driveway in the dark, with my hands still unsteady and my thoughts still too sharp and jagged to be organized into something she could hold without cutting herself on it. I need you to come to Sacramento, I said. Can you do that? Can you get a flight tomorrow? The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I know because I was counting. Tell me one thing, she said. Her voice had changed completely. The warmth was still there, but underneath it now was something else. Something steady and serious that reminded me with a force that nearly undid me entirely of her mother. Is it bad? I looked out through the windshield at the kitchen window, at the wreath, at the pine and cinnamon smell I could almost imagine through the glass. Yes, I said. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't push for details or demand explanations. She simply said, I'll book the flight right now. I'll text you the confirmation. And I heard her already moving, already pulling up her phone already closing the distance the only way she could. Nora. My voice broke on her name just slightly, just at the edge, just enough. Don't call Owen. Don't tell him you're coming. Another pause. Shorter this time. Okay, Dad, she said quietly. And then softer, still so soft I almost missed it. I love you. I ended the call and sat in my car for another 5 minutes, breathing carefully the way you breathe when you are trying to keep something contained that very much wants to come apart. Then I went inside, made a cup of tea. I didn't drink and sat in Margaret's chair until it was late enough that the neighborhood went quiet, and the only sound was the furnace running and the December wind moving through the elm tree in the front yard. I didn't sleep that night either. But when I drove to Diana's office the next morning, I drove knowing that Nora was on her way, that the one person in my family who would look at what Owen had done and call it exactly what it was, would be standing next to me before this was over. That mattered more than I knew how to say. That same morning, still the 23rd of December, Diana made 3 phone calls that would determine everything about the following night. Detective Carol Briggs picked up on the first ring. Diana had put the call on speaker, and Briggs's voice came through the phone with the clipped, no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had spent 22 years working financial crimes in Placer County and had stopped being surprised by human behavior somewhere around year 4. Diana, what have you got? Elder financial abuse. Welfare and Institutions Code. Section 15610. Diana said, settling into her chair with her legal pad in front of her. Forged power of attorney with a fraudulent notary seal. Fraudulent medical certification. Unauthorized use of real property as loan collateral. Possible bank fraud at the federal level if the loan application crossed state lines. She paused. I'm sending you the footage files and the document examiner's preliminary report within the hour. A brief silence on the other end. Not hesitation, just processing. Property location. Lake Tahoe, North Shore, Placer County. The owner is Thomas Calloway, 63, Sacramento. What's the ask? Diana looked at me across the conference table. I leaned forward slightly. We want to let them run the play, I said. All the way to Christmas Eve, they've organized a public event at the Property Investors Business Associates' local contacts. Preston Hargrove intends to announce the project and collect commitments that night. We want everyone in that room when it falls apart. Another pause. I could hear Briggs breathing steadily, thinking. You understand, she said, That if the bank releases funds before we can intervene, recovery becomes significantly more complicated. The bank won't release, Diana said. I'm calling them next. But I need your office coordinating with the DA so we have everything ready to move simultaneously on the 24th. Send me the files, Briggs said. I'll read them tonight. If what you're describing holds up, and from what you've outlined, it sounds like it will, I can have a team ready. A beat. Mr. Calloway? Yes, I said. I've worked a lot of these cases, she said, and her voice shifted just slightly, just enough to let something human through the professional surface. Family members taking advantage of elderly parents. It doesn't get easier to hear about. I'm sorry this is happening to you. My jaw tightened. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Thank you, Detective. Send the files, she said, and hung up. Diana was already dialing the bank. The conversation with the loan officer was shorter and considerably less warm. Diana identified herself, referenced the property address and the loan application number she had pulled from the Placer County records, and explained in the precise, unhurried language of someone who has made this kind of call before, that the power of attorney used to authorize the application had been identified as fraudulent, that the property owner had not consented to any loan, and that proceeding with disbursement would expose the institution to significant legal liability. The loan officer asked to speak with his supervisor. Diana held. 3 minutes later, a senior compliance officer came on the line. The pre-approval is being suspended pending fraud review, he said. A fraud hold will be placed on the application file. No funds will be disbursed until the matter is resolved. I'll need that in writing, Diana said. You'll have it by end of business today. She ended the call and made a note. Then she looked up at me. There's one more person I need to contact, she said. Linda Ashworth. She's an independent real estate investor out of Los Angeles. Preston invited her to the Christmas Eve event as a lead investor. I've worked with her before on a different matter. She's sharp, she's ethical, and when I show her what we have, she'll cooperate. Diana's expression was measured but firm. Having her inside that room on the 24th, knowing what she knows, gives us another set of eyes and a credible witness who was invited by Preston himself. Do it, I said. Diana made the third call. I listened to her walk Linda Ashworth through the outline of the situation, the forged documents, the footage, the debt structure, the fraudulent medical certification. Linda asked 3 questions, all of them precise and practical. By the end of the call, she had agreed to attend the event as planned and to wait for my signal before taking any action. When Diana set the phone down for the 3rd time, the afternoon light had shifted. The conference room was quieter than it had been all day. There's something else, I said. Something I haven't told anyone. Diana set down her pen and waited. 3 months ago, I said Owen started asking questions about the property value, about my will, about what would happen to the lake house after I was gone. The questions were careful, he spaced them out, never pushed too hard, but they were consistent, and they made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't entirely explain. I reached into my jacket and laid a document on the table between us. I spoke with an estate attorney in September. On October 3rd, I transferred the lake house and all 6 acres into an irrevocable trust. Diana picked up the document and began reading. Her eyes moved quickly, then slowed, then stopped. She read one section twice. Then she set the document down very carefully, the way you set something down when you realize it is more significant than you initially understood. The Margaret Calloway Memorial Trust, she said. Irrevocable, I said. Established under California Probate Code. The property cannot be sold, mortgaged, or demolished. Upon my death, it transfers to a charitable purpose, a retreat facility for retired nurses and caregivers and families dealing with loss. I paused. Owen was originally designated as successor trustee. There is a clause that automatically removes any trustee found to have committed fraud or financial abuse against the trust or its grantor. Diana looked at me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Thomas, they have been trying to steal something that has been legally unavailable to steal for 3 months." "I know," I said. "Preston's loan application is based on collateral that cannot be pledged. Owen's power of attorney is over an asset he cannot transfer. Every document they've filed, every plan they've made." She stopped. "Built on nothing," I said. "I spent 40 years in structural engineering, Diana. I know what happens to buildings with bad foundations." For the first time all day, something crossed Diana's face that might in a different context have been called a smile. "Brace yourself," she said, picking up her pen again. "Because tomorrow night we're going to let them find out." I left Diana's office at 4:30 and drove home through the Sacramento rush hour with the heater running and the radio off. There was one thing left to do before tomorrow night. One call I had been turning over in my mind since the moment Diana said, "Brace yourself," and probably since long before that, since the car ride back from Lake Tahoe the previous evening, since the moment I watched my son's hand move across a page that said his father had lost his mind. I needed to call Owen, not to confront him, not to give him any warning of what was coming. I needed to call him and tell him in the tired and defeated voice of a man who has decided it is easier to give in than to keep fighting that I would be there tomorrow night, that I would sign. I needed him to believe it completely. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes, preparing. This was not acting exactly, it was engineering. I was calculating the load I needed to carry the tone I needed, to sustain the precise degree of weariness that would sound convincing to a son who had known my voice his entire life. Too much defeat, and he would suspect. Too little, and he would push harder, ask more questions, give Sylvia and Preston time to adjust their plans. I needed to sound like a man who was tired, because underneath everything I was. I dialed 517. Owen picked up after 3 rings. His voice was careful when he answered, not warm, not cold, just carefully positioned somewhere in between, like a man who has been waiting for a call and isn't sure yet which version of it he's getting. "Dad." "Owen." I let a long breath out slowly, the way a man does when he has been carrying something heavy for too long and has finally decided to set it down. "I've been thinking." A pause. I could hear him adjust a subtle shift in his breathing, a change in the background sound, as though he had moved to a different room. Getting away from Sylvia, I thought, wanting to take this call alone. "Okay," he said, careful, still waiting. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left fighting with my own family over a piece of property," I said. "Your mother wouldn't have wanted that. I don't want that." I paused for exactly the right beat. "I'll come tomorrow night. If you need me to sign something, I'll sign it." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then Owen exhaled, and the sound of it nearly broke me in half. It was not the exhale of a victor. It was not the satisfied release of someone who had outmaneuvered an opponent and was savoring the result. It was the exhale of a person who had been holding their breath for weeks, maybe months, under the weight of something they had convinced themselves was manageable, but had never not for a single moment stopped being afraid of. It was the sound of a man who had been terrified that his father would find out and had just been told he wouldn't. That sound told me more about my son than anything I had seen in those footage files. "Dad!" he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word just at the edge, just enough. I thank you. I know this isn't easy. No, I said. It isn't. It's going to be good, though. You'll see. The development is going to be something really special. Preston has investors lined up. There's a full architectural plan. Owen. I kept my voice quiet. Level. What time do you need me there? He stopped talking. 7 o'clock, he said. We start at 7. I'll be there at 7, I said. Okay. A beat. Do you want me to come pick you up? It's a long drive in December. The offer landed strangely. I looked through my windshield at the kitchen window at the outline of Margaret's wreath in the light. My son had spent months helping a man steal my home, had signed documents declaring me mentally incompetent, had watched someone lay his mother's photograph face down on a desk and said nothing. And now he was offering to drive me to the event where he expected me to sign it all away because December roads in the Sierra Nevada could be icy, and he didn't want his 63-year-old father driving alone in the dark. I had raised him to think about things like that. Even now, that instinct was still there, buried under everything else, operating on its own, independent of what he had allowed himself to become. That more than anything was what made my chest hurt. I'll drive myself, I said. I'll see you at 7. I ended the call and put the phone on the passenger seat. Outside, the neighborhood had gone quiet in the way it does on December evenings. Porch lights coming on a dog barking somewhere down the block. The smell of someone's fireplace drifting through the cold air. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the first time Owen had called me Dad, with complete understanding of what the word meant. Not the toddler reflex of it, but the real weight of it, the time he was 11 and had fallen off his bike badly enough to need stitches and had grabbed my hand in the emergency room and held on until the doctor was done. I thought about his high school graduation, the way he had scanned the crowd for me and Margaret before he would let himself smile. I thought about his wedding day, when he had been so nervous at the altar that his hands were visibly shaking, and I had caught his eye from the front pew and given him the small nod that had always meant between us, "You're fine, I've got you." But I had always had him. Even now, sitting in my car with the carved piece of oak pressing against my chest through the fabric of my jacket, some part of me still did. I went inside, heated up soup I didn't taste, and went to bed. I lay in the dark for an hour before I understood that I wasn't going to sleep. So I got up and sat in Margaret's chair instead, and I watched the winter dark outside the kitchen window, and I waited for morning. Nora's flight landed at Sacramento International at 10:47 in the morning. I knew the exact time because I had been watching the arrivals board on my phone since 9 o'clock, refreshing it every few minutes, the way you do when you are waiting for something you cannot control, and the only thing that helps is the illusion of monitoring it. She came through the arrivals door, pulling a single carry-on, wearing her gray wool coat and the dark green scarf Margaret had knitted for her the last Christmas before the diagnosis. She spotted me immediately. I was standing near the pillar by the exit, where we had always agreed to meet whenever I picked her up from this airport, going back to when she was 22 and flying home from architecture school for Thanksgiving. Old habits. The kind that survive everything. When she reached me, she didn't say anything. She put both arms around me and held on, and I felt her exhale against my shoulder, long and shaky, like something she had been holding since the night before. And for a moment I could not speak either, because she smelled like her mother's shampoo, the same brand Margaret had used for 30 years, and my throat closed around whatever I had been planning to say. "Okay," she said, finally pulling back and looking at my face with the direct, clear-eyed assessment that had always reminded me of a younger version of Margaret. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "Tell me everything." I told her in the car on the way home. All of it, the call from Sylvia, the attorney's letter, Roy's photographs. What I had seen through the window at Lake Tahoe, Owen signing the power of attorney, the footage files, Diana's findings, the trust, the plan for tomorrow night. I talked for 40 minutes without stopping, and Nora listened without interrupting once, which was something she had always been able to do, hold space for the whole shape of a thing before she responded to any part of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, staring at the highway ahead. Then she said, "I want to go see Owen." I glanced at her. "Nora, not to warn him," she said immediately, turning to look at me with an expression that left no room for misunderstanding. "I'm not going to warn him, Dad. I just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I need to look at him. I need to ask him one question and see his face when he answers it." I thought about telling her not to go. I thought about the risk of it, the possibility that Owen might call Preston, that something might shift in their plans if they knew Nora had come home. But I looked at my daughter's face, the set of her jaw, the brightness in her eyes that was not tears, but something harder and more determined than tears, and I understood that this was not something I could talk her out of, and that perhaps I should not try. "Be careful," I said. "Don't tell him about Diana. Don't mention the trust." "I know," she said. "One question. That's all." She borrowed my car and drove to Lake Tahoe that afternoon, while I stayed in Sacramento and tried to eat lunch and failed at it entirely. She called Owen from the road and told him she was passing through and wanted to say hello, casual enough that he wouldn't think twice about it and wouldn't mention it to Sylvia or Preston as anything worth noting. She was gone for 3 hours. When she came back, she let herself in with her key, hung her coat on the hook by the door, and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at me with an expression I had never quite seen on her face before. Something that was not anger and not grief, but the particular look of someone who has confirmed something they were hoping was wrong. "He answered," she said, eventually. "What did you ask him?" She crossed the kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from me at the table where we had eaten 1,000 family dinners. She folded her hands on the surface, her mother's hands, the same shape, the same way of holding themselves when she was steadying herself for something. "I asked him if he had signed a document saying you had lost your mind," she said. "I asked him to look me in the eye and tell me whether he had done that." My chest tightened so hard it was difficult to draw a full breath. "And he couldn't do it," she said. Her voice didn't waver, but her knuckles went white against the back of her own hand. "He tried to explain. He started talking about the property value and Preston's company and how it was all going to be handled carefully and how you would be taken care of, and I let him talk until he ran out of things to say." She paused. "And then I told him that Mom would have known exactly what to call what he was doing, and that it wouldn't have been family planning." The kitchen was very still. Outside the window, the late afternoon light was fading over the Sacramento rooftops, the same winter light that came every December, the same light Margaret used to say made everything look like an old photograph. "He cried," Nora said. Her voice was flat, not unkind, just factual. "He sat down on the porch steps, and he put his face in his hands, and he cried. And I stood there and watched him, and I thought about all the times growing up when Owen cried, and I would go sit next to him, because that's what you do with your brother. But I didn't sit next to him this time." She looked up at me. "I couldn't." I reached across the table and covered her folded hands with mine. She turned her hands over immediately and gripped mine back hard enough that I could feel the tension in every finger. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry you're in the middle of this." "I'm not in the middle of it," she said firmly. "I'm on your side. There's a difference." She tightened her grip. "I'll be with you tomorrow night, Dad, whatever happens." That evening, we did not talk about Owen again. We built a fire in the fireplace. and Nora made tea, and I found the old photograph albums Margaret had kept in the hall closet, the ones with the sticky plastic pages and the photos slightly faded at the edges from 20 years of sitting on a shelf. We sat on the floor in front of the fire the way Nora and Owen had sat as children on Christmas Eve, passing the albums back and forth. And we talked about Margaret, the way she laughed, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she had once driven 40 minutes in the wrong direction on a road trip, rather than admit she had misread the map and only confessed when Nora recognized a gas station they had passed an hour earlier. The fire burned down to coals while we were talking. Neither of us moved to add more wood. We just sat in the fading warmth surrounded by photographs of a woman who had always known when something was wrong before anyone said a word, and we let ourselves miss her completely and without apology one more time before tomorrow. I woke before 5, not because an alarm had gone off or because some noise had pulled me out of sleep, but because my body understood in the particular way that bodies understand things the mind hasn't fully processed, yet that today was the day. I lay in the dark for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the furnace and the winter quiet of the neighborhood outside, and then I got up and went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I stood at the window while it brewed and looked at Margaret's wreath hanging there in the dark. The pines smell faint now after 3 days, but still present the way certain things persist, long after you expect them to have faded. When the coffee was ready, I poured 1 cup for myself and set a 2nd cup ready for Nora, and I sat down at the kitchen table and reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, which was hanging on the chair beside me. The piece of carved oak was exactly where I had left it. I set it on the table in front of me and looked at it in the early morning light. 26 years since Owen and I had knelt together at the bottom of that staircase, and the letters were still as clean as the morning we cut them. Thomas and Margaret, Christmas, 1998. I ran my thumb along the carved letters one at a time. THOMAS. The wood was smooth where the knife hadn't touched, and slightly rough where it had, and the difference between the two felt under my thumb in that quiet kitchen on that quiet morning, like the difference between the life I had built and the life that had been quietly dismantled around me while I wasn't paying the right kind of attention. I put it back in my jacket pocket. Then I opened the drawer in the kitchen table, the one where Margaret had kept rubber bands, spare batteries, and the small things that didn't belong anywhere else, and I found what I was looking for near the back. A photograph in a plain silver frame small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. Margaret and me, 1986, outside the church in Folsom, squinting into the June sun. She was laughing at something just off frame. I was looking at her instead of the camera the way I always did. I slid the photograph out of its frame, folded it carefully once along a line that didn't cross her face, and put it in the same pocket as the piece of oak. Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30, her hair still uncombed, wearing the flannel shirt she had been sleeping in, and holding the mug I had set out for her in both hands, like it was the only warm thing in the world. "You've been up for a while," she said. It wasn't a question. Since before 5, she pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, wrapping both hands around the mug. She looked tired, the specific tiredness of someone who had slept but not rested, the kind that sits behind the eyes. But her gaze when she looked at me across the table was steady. "How are you doing?" she asked. I thought about the honest answer to that question. I thought about it for long enough that she recognized I was actually considering it, rather than deflecting, and she waited the way she always did. "I'm sad," I said finally. "I'm going to be sad about this for a long time, but I know what needs to happen tonight, and I know why, and I'm not going to let the sadness get in the way of doing it." Nora nodded slowly. Mom would say that's the most engineer answer to an emotional question she's ever heard. The laugh that came out of me was small and unexpected, and hurt a little on the way out the way, Laughing sometimes does when you're not braced for it. She said that to me approximately once a week for 34 years. I know, Nora said. I inherited the habit of saying it. Diana called at 8:15. Her voice was crisp and organized, each item delivered with the efficiency of a checklist being read aloud. Detective Briggs and her team were confirmed 2 investigators and a coordinating officer from the Placer County DA's office. The bank's Fraud Compliance Division had issued a written suspension of the loan pre-approval and had been briefed on what to expect that evening. The county building inspector had been notified and would have a stop work order prepared and ready to serve. Linda Ashworth had confirmed her attendance and would be seated near the front of the room as planned. Gary Novak was already on site, having driven up that morning with his equipment to ensure the projection system was functional before the event began. "Is there anything you need from me before tonight?" Diana asked. "No," I said. "You've done everything." "Thomas." Her voice shifted just slightly, the same small shift I had heard when Detective Briggs had mentioned elder abuse cases, that brief moment when the professional surface admits something human underneath it. "Whatever happens in that room tonight, you handled this exactly right. Carefully and legally, and with more restraint than most people would have managed. Margaret would have been proud of you." My throat tightened so sharply that I had to press my lips together and breathe through my nose before I could respond. Nora was watching me from across the table. She reached over and put her hand over mine on the tabletop, and I felt her grip warm and certain her mother's hands. "Thank you, Diana," I said when I could say it steadily. "We'll see you tonight." We left Sacramento at 3 in the afternoon. The drive up Interstate 80 was clear as far as Auburn, where the foothills started to show snow on the north-facing slopes, and the temperature on the dashboard dropped 4 degrees in 10 minutes. By the time we reached Emigrant Gap, the mountains were fully in view, granite and snow, and the particular hard blue of a December sky over the Sierra Nevada, the kind of sky that doesn't apologize for anything. Nora drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the mountains come toward us. The same mountains I had driven toward with Margaret for 26 years of summers and winters, and I did not say very much. There was not very much left to say. At the top of the grade where the highway crests and you can see the lake for the first time, a flat silver glimmer between the tree line, Nora reached over, without looking away from the road, and squeezed my hand once. Hard. The way her mother used to when words were beside the point. I squeezed back. In the distance, through the last of the afternoon light, the windows of the lake house were already lit. Warm and gold from the outside, full of people who had been invited to witness a transaction that was never going to happen. I put my hand over the outside of my jacket, over the pocket where the oak and the photograph were sitting, and I held it there. "Okay," I said quietly, to myself, to Margaret, to the mountains. "Okay." There were 14 vehicles in the driveway when we pulled up. I counted them automatically the way an engineer counts things, not because the number mattered, but because counting gave my hands something to do while the rest of me absorbed what I was looking at. My house, my driveway. 14 cars that belonged to people who had been invited here by a man who did not own the ground they were parked on. Nora put the car in park and looked at the house for a moment without speaking. The windows blazed with warm light. Through the glass, I could see movement shadows crossing back and forth, the particular animation of a room full of people who believe they are at the beginning of something. "Ready?" Nora asked. "No," I said. "Let's go." We walked to the front door together. I had my hand in my jacket pocket, fingers wrapped around the piece of carved oak, and I held it the way Margaret used to hold my hand, when she was nervous, not squeezing, just holding, just making sure something solid was there. I pushed open the front door and walked into my house. The noise hit first conversation and laughter, the bright clink of glasses, Christmas music coming from somewhere I couldn't immediately locate. The entry hall had been transformed with floral arrangements I had never ordered, and lighting fixtures I had never chosen. And the smell of the place was wrong in a way I felt before I could name it. Catered food and unfamiliar perfume, and new paint where the walls had been touched up, covering the particular smell of old wood and lake air that had been the smell of this house for 26 years. No one looked at us when we came in. We moved into the main room, and I stopped just inside the doorway to get my bearings. 50, maybe 55 people. Men in blazers and women in holiday dresses, holding glasses of wine and champagne clustered in the particular formations of people who know each other through business rather than friendship. At the far end of the room, a small raised platform had been set up, a lectern, a microphone, and behind it, the architectural model of the proposed development covered in a red cloth. Beside it stood a 10-foot Christmas tree, hung with what appeared to be coordinated silver ornaments, not a single one of them chosen by anyone I loved. On the wall where our family photographs had hung for 2 decades, nothing. Clean paint and picture hooks with nothing on them. My throat burned. A woman I didn't recognize looked up from her conversation, noticed Nora and me standing near the doorway, and touched the arm of the woman next to her. They both looked. Then the first woman caught Sylvia's eye across the room. Sylvia came toward us with the smooth, practiced movement of someone who has spent years managing social situations. Her expression composed into something that was almost welcoming. Almost. "Dad," she said, leaning in for a brief, performative embrace that made every muscle in my back go rigid. "I'm so glad you could make it." I said I would. I told her. A man I vaguely recognized, one of Preston's cousins I thought from the wedding 8 years ago, stepped closer and said to Sylvia in a voice just low enough to seem private, but not quite private enough. "Who is this?" Sylvia's smile didn't change. "Owen's father," she said. "The former owner." The former owner. I heard it, the way you hear something, when every sense is already heightened. Not just the words, but the ease of them, the complete absence of hesitation. The fact that she had reached for that phrase, the way you reach for a phrase you've already used in your head 100 times. She had been thinking of me as the former owner for longer than tonight. Much longer. I kept my face still. I kept my breathing even. And I let the words sit in my chest where they needed to sit, because I was going to need them later. Owen appeared from the far side of the room, moving toward me with an expression that was trying very hard to project confidence and achieving something closer to controlled anxiety. He put his hand on my shoulder too firmly, the grip of someone who needs to feel that things are solid. "Dad." He leaned close, his voice dropping. "I'm really glad you came. Please let tonight go smoothly. Sign when Preston asks you to shake some hands, and then we can all go home and talk properly tomorrow. Okay?" I looked at my son's face. Up close in the warm light of the room, I could see that he hadn't slept well either. There were shadows under his eyes and a tightness around his mouth that I recognized from the nights years ago when he had done something wrong and was waiting to find out if I knew. "Where is your mother's photograph?" I asked. He blinked. The question had clearly not been what he was braced for. We moved some things around for the event. You can have them back, Dad. All of them. After tonight. After tonight. After I had signed." "All right," I said quietly. "I heard you, Owen." He held my gaze for a moment, searching it for something, reassurance maybe, or capitulation, or just the familiar face of the father who had always eventually come around. Then he nodded and moved away back toward Preston and the platform. I turned and found Linda Ashworth. She was standing near the window that overlooked the lake, the window where Margaret had once kept her coffee cup on the sill every morning without fail, holding a glass of sparkling water and speaking with a man in a gray suit. She was 45 with dark hair cut close and the self-contained expression of someone who is listening carefully to everything being said to her and considerably more of what isn't. When her eyes moved across the room and found mine, there was a single beat of recognition. Not a nod, not a gesture, just the particular stillness of someone who has registered a signal and is ready. I moved my gaze away before anyone could notice the exchange. On the opposite wall near the door to the hallway, Gary Novak stood beside a wheeled AV cart with a laptop open and a cable running to the large flat screen that had been mounted on the wall for the presentation. He was dressed in dark slacks and a plain button-down indistinguishable from any other service provider at an event like this. His eyes met mine for exactly half a second. Everything was in place. Preston Hargrove stepped onto the platform at the far end of the room, straightened his jacket, and tapped the microphone twice. The room began to quiet. I put my hand in my jacket pocket and closed my fingers around the piece of carved oak, and I stood in the back of my own living room and waited for the man who intended to sell my house to start talking. I'm about to tell you exactly what I did when they handed me that pen. But before I do, drop a 14 or the word home in the comments if you believe a person has the right to protect what they built with their own hands. Your comment tells me you're still here, and right now that matters to me. Please note this story weaves in fictional elements. For educational and entertainment purposes, certain names, settings, and details are not intended to represent any specific individuals. If you'd prefer not to continue, this is a natural place to pause. For everyone staying, let's finish this together. Preston Hargrove was a good speaker. I'll give him that much. He had the voice of a man who had stood in front of rooms like this one many times, unhurried, warm at the edges, projecting the particular confidence of someone who believes that what he is saying and what is true are the same thing. He talked about vision. He talked about legacy. He talked about the opportunity this property represented, the potential of the location, the strength of the market, the architectural plans that would transform this site into something that would, in his words, honor the natural beauty of Lake Tahoe for generations to come. He did not say my name once. He did not say Margaret's name at all. He spoke for 11 minutes about a house he had never built, a dream he had never had, and a piece of land he had spent 26 years calculating how to take. And he did it with such fluency and such ease that 2 or 3 of the people nearest to me were nodding along by the end, their faces carrying the soft, credulous look of people who are deciding to believe something because believing it is more comfortable than not. When he finished, the room applauded. Sylvia stepped forward and took hold of the red cloth covering the architectural model. She looked out at the room with a smile that was genuinely warm. She believed in this, I realized. Whatever else she was, she believed in this future she was building, and the believing made her beautiful in the way that certainty sometimes does, even when the certainty is built on something rotten. She pulled the cloth away. The model gleamed under the event lighting, 3 stories of glass and steel and engineered wood. Nothing like the house Margaret and I had built. Nothing like anything either of us had ever wanted. The room applauded again, louder this time. Owen stepped up beside his father-in-law and took the microphone. His voice was steadier than I expected. He had prepared for this moment, rehearsed it, and the rehearsal showed in the way he stood and the way he breathed. This property has been in my family for over 25 years, he said. My father built something remarkable here. And now, with his blessing, we have the opportunity to build something even greater. He paused, and his eyes found me at the back of the room. Dad, would you come up, please? Every head in the room turned. I felt 50 pairs of eyes land on me simultaneously, and I held very still for exactly one breath, the way you hold still at the top of a structure before you begin the controlled work of bringing it down. And then I walked forward through the crowd. People moved aside to let me through. The room was very quiet now, the particular quiet of an audience that senses it is about to witness a moment. I walked to the platform, climbed the 2 steps, and stood beside my son. Sylvia was already holding the pen out to me. Her arm extended with the smooth anticipation of someone who has already mentally moved past this moment to the next one. Preston held the contract open on the lectern, one hand flat on the page, index finger pointing at the signature line. "Right here, Thomas," Preston said. His voice was generous, avuncular, the voice of a man graciously accepting something he had already decided was his. "Just your name." I took the pen from Sylvia. I looked at the signature line. Then I looked up at the microphone still live in its stand at the edge of the lectern. "Before I sign," I said, "would it be all right if I said a few words about this house?" Preston's smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind it, a fractional tightening, a recalibration. "Of course," he said. "Please, keep it brief." I set the pen down on the lectern. I picked up the microphone. "My wife Margaret and I bought this land in 1998, I said. 6 acres on the north shore of Lake Tahoe. We paid for it with money we had saved over 23 years of working. She was a registered nurse, I was a civil engineer. We designed the house ourselves. We made most of the construction decisions ourselves. My son Owen was 10 years old when we broke ground, and he helped me lay the stone for the fireplace you're all standing next to." I paused. The room was completely still. "Margaret died 6 years ago," I said. "Pancreatic cancer. She never lost her sense of humor. She never stopped asking about other people's lives. And she tended the hydrangea garden at the edge of that lake until she physically could not anymore. This house was the last big thing we built together. The last promise I kept to her was that I would keep it." Linda Ashworth had set down her glass. She was watching me with an expression that had gone from polite attention to something considerably more focused. "3 days ago," I continued, "my daughter-in-law called to tell me I was no longer welcome here at Christmas. 2 days ago, my neighbor called to tell me that construction vehicles bearing the Hargrove Development Group logo had been on this property for 2 days. I let that land. This evening I was asked to sign a document transferring ownership of my home to my son and his father-in-law. A power of attorney filed 6 weeks ago without my knowledge claims that I am no longer mentally competent to manage my own affairs. The murmuring started low and spread fast, the way fire spreads when the wind picks up. Preston stepped forward, his hand reaching for the microphone, his voice dropping the warmth entirely. "Thomas, this is not the time or the place." I stepped back one clean step, keeping the microphone. "With respect, Preston, this is exactly the place. You chose it." Owen grabbed my arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to hurt, and his voice came out low and ragged and frightened, in a way I had not heard since he was very small. "Dad, stop, please." I looked at my son. His eyes were wide and dark, and there was a tremor running through his jaw that he was trying very hard to control. He looked in that moment exactly the way he had looked in the emergency room at 11 years old, frightened and young and reaching for something solid. "You asked me to come tonight," I said quietly just to him, just for a moment. "I came. Now let me finish." His grip loosened. Not because he agreed, because something in my voice reached past everything else and found the part of him that was still underneath it all, my son. I turned back to the room. "I'm not here tonight to sign anything," I said. I'm here because this is my home and because the people in this room deserve to know what they've actually been invited to participate in. I looked out at the 50 faces looking back at me, curious, confused, some already alarmed. What you've been told tonight is a story. What I've just told you is what actually happened here. And in a moment, you're going to hear from some people who have something important to add. I looked toward the front door. It opened. Diana Mercer walked in first. She was followed by Detective Carol Briggs, a compact woman in a dark blazer with the unhurried, wait-forward walk of someone who has entered difficult rooms before and has never once needed to rush to establish authority. Behind them came two investigators from the Placer County DA's office, a building inspector in a county-issue vest, and a man in a charcoal suit, who I recognized as the bank's fraud compliance officer from the documentation Diana had shown me 2 days earlier. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in stages, the people nearest the door first, then a ripple outward as heads turned and conversations dropped, and the particular charged silence of a room that has just understood something is wrong spread all the way to the back wall. Preston turned from the lectern. His face went through 3 expressions in less than 2 seconds: surprise, then calculation, then the controlled blankness of a man who has decided to brazen it out. Diana, his voice was still smooth, still warm. This is a private event. Mr. Hargrove. Diana walked to the platform with her briefcase and set it on the lectern beside the contract Preston had laid out for my signature. She opened it and removed a document. I'm here on behalf of Thomas Calloway, the legal owner of this property. I need everyone's attention for just a few minutes. She didn't wait for permission. The power of attorney used to initiate the loan application on this property was filed with a fraudulent notary seal. She said, addressing the room directly, her voice carrying to every corner without effort. Under California Penal Code Section 470, a forged notary stamp on a real estate document constitutes criminal fraud. Additionally, the medical certification claiming that Mr. Calloway lacks cognitive capacity was signed by a physician who has never examined him, which constitutes medical fraud under California Business and Professions Code. Both documents are currently under investigation by the Placer County District Attorney's Office. The murmuring that broke out was immediate and sharp. Preston stepped forward, his composure fraying at the edges now, his voice dropping its warmth entirely. These are allegations, unsubstantiated allegations, and this is neither the time nor the notary registration number on your power of attorney, Diana said, without raising her voice, does not correspond to any active notary commission in the state of California. I have the Secretary of State's verification here. She held up a single page. Would you like me to read the registration number aloud so anyone with a phone can check it themselves? Preston closed his mouth. The fraud compliance officer stepped forward. He was a careful, deliberate man who looked like he had delivered bad news to powerful people before and found it entirely routine. On behalf of the lending institution, he said, I am formally notifying all parties that the loan pre-approval associated with this property is hereby suspended pending a fraud review. No funds will be disbursed. A fraud hold has been placed on the application file, effective as of this evening. A man near the window. One of the lead investors, I thought from the way Preston had greeted him earlier, said loudly, What does that mean for the project timeline? It means, Detective Briggs said, stepping forward for the first time, her voice flat and entirely without drama, that there is no project timeline. Not tonight. She looked at Preston. Mr. Hargrove, I have questions for you and I'd appreciate your cooperation. Mr. and Mrs. Calloway. She looked at Owen and Sylvia as well. That was when Gary Novak turned on the screen. The footage appeared without announcement or introduction. Just the study of my lake house, gray-green in the camera's low-light mode, and then Owen walking in alone with his moving blankets and his box and his voice coming through the speakers with terrible, clarifying clarity. The bank's timeline works. If Dad signs by the 24th, the draw releases before year-end. Someone in the room made a sound, not quite a gasp. Something smaller and more involuntary than that the sound a person makes when something clicks into place that they were hoping wouldn't. The footage kept running. Preston's voice standing at my window. The medical certification is handled. Fitch signed off yesterday. Then Sylvia holding the photograph of Margaret and me on our wedding day, her voice light and dismissive. All this old stuff makes the place look like a nursing home. And then Owen in the doorway looking at his mother's photograph lying face down on the desk. He didn't pick it up. He turned and walked out. The room was absolutely silent. Linda Ashworth set her glass down on the nearest surface and stood up straight. She was 45 years old, and she had the particular bearing of a woman who has built her own career and knows exactly what her reputation is worth. "I'm withdrawing from this project," she said clearly and without drama. "Effective right now." She looked at the three people nearest her who had come as fellow investors. "I'd encourage you to do the same." Two of them nodded immediately. The third was already on his phone. Owen turned to Preston. Every careful composure he had been maintaining since I walked through the front door came apart at once, and underneath it was something raw and desperate and very young. "You told me the documentation was clean," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "You told me there was no way anyone would find out." Preston's jaw tightened. "You signed those documents of your own free will, Owen. Don't stand there and pretend you didn't know what you were signing. You said it was a formality. I said it was handled." Preston's voice went cold and hard. "Handle your own wife and stop looking for someone to blame." Sylvia spun toward her father. Her face flushed, her voice rising. "You promised us this was legal. You promised us." "Lower your voice," Preston said. "Don't tell me to lower my voice." Detective Briggs raised one hand, and the authority in the gesture was so complete that all three of them stopped. "We're going to need everyone directly involved to remain on the premises," she said. "My investigators will speak with each of you separately." She nodded to Gary Novak. "Can you preserve a copy of that footage for evidentiary purposes?" "Already done," Gary said. "Certified copy chain of custody intact." I was still standing on the platform. I had not moved since the door opened. I stood there with the microphone at my side and watched the room rearrange itself around the truth, and I felt underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the particular ache of watching my son unravel 20 feet in front of me. Something that was not satisfaction, exactly something quieter and more complicated than that. Something that felt distantly like the end of a very long project finally coming into its final form. The room emptied the way rooms do after something irreversible has happened quickly and without much conversation. The investors left first, some of them on their phones, before they reached the door. The Hargrove relatives followed, gathering coats and purses with the particular hurry of people who want to establish as quickly as possible that they were not really part of whatever this was. Detective Briggs and her investigators moved Preston, Owen, and Sylvia to separate corners of the room, not yet under arrest. Just separated, just answering questions, their phones and laptops collected into evidence bags with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Sylvia was crying loudly and without restraint, in the way that people cry when they are frightened rather than sorry. Her mascara had tracked dark lines down both cheeks, and she kept saying to no one in particular that she had trusted her father, and none of this had been her idea, and someone needed to call her mother. Preston said nothing at all. He sat in a chair near the window, my window, Margaret's window, with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the expression of a man who has already begun calculating his next move and has decided that cooperation is not part of it. Owen answered the investigator's questions in a voice so flat and so empty that it didn't sound like him at all. I stepped down from the platform. Nora appeared at my side and we stood together near the fireplace, the one Owen and I had built stone by stone, and we watched the room complete its accounting. It took about 40 minutes. When the last investigator had gone, when the door had closed for the final time, the lake house was quiet in a way it hadn't been all evening. The Christmas tree lights were still on. Someone had left a half-full glass of champagne on the mantelpiece, right where Margaret's photograph used to stand. Owen was still there. He had not left with the others. He was standing in the middle of the room alone, his jacket wrinkled and his tie loosened, looking at the floor with the fixed, unfocused gaze of someone who has just watched the specific future they had been counting on disappear and hasn't yet figured out what to look at instead. He heard me move and looked up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not the silence of people avoiding each other, but the silence of a father and a son who have just come through something that has changed the shape of everything between them and are both trying to find where the new edges are. I crossed the room and stood in front of him. "Dad!" His voice broke on the first syllable, just cracked straight through it. And then he pressed his lips together hard, and his eyes went bright with tears he was working very hard not to release. "I don't have anything to say that's enough. I know that. He stopped, swallowed. I'm sorry for all of it." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The piece of carved oak was warm from being against my chest all evening. I held it for a moment, feeling the letters under my thumb one last time, Thomas and Margaret Christmas, 1998. And then I held it out to Owen. He looked at it. He looked at it for a long time without taking it, his jaw working, his eyes filling until one tear escaped and tracked down the side of his face, and he didn't move to wipe it away. Then he took it from my hand, carefully. Both hands, the way you take something you understand might break. "The boy who carved his name here with me," I said quietly, "was a good kid, Owen. Whatever happened to him, I hope he finds his way back." Owen's breath came out in a single, ragged, broken sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a word, just something that had been compressed for a very long time, finally forcing its way out. He pressed the piece of wood against his chest with both hands and bent forward slightly, as though the weight of what he was holding was more than just wood. I took a breath and reached into my briefcase. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. "Something I should have told you months ago but didn't because I was hoping I wouldn't need to." I laid the trust document on the table between us. 3 months ago, I said, I transferred this property into an irrevocable trust, the Margaret Calloway Memorial Trust. It cannot be sold, mortgaged, or demolished, not by me, not by anyone. When I die, this house becomes a free retreat for retired nurses and caregivers and families who have lost someone. I paused. "You were named as the successor trustee. There's a clause that removes any trustee who commits fraud against the trust or its grantor." I looked at him. "You removed yourself, Owen." "I didn't do it." "You did." Owen stared at the document. The color had left his face entirely. "You knew," he said. "When I signed that power of attorney, you already knew it was worthless." "Yes." "Then why?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you just say that and stop all of this before it started?" I looked at my son, this man I had carried to the clinic at a run, This boy whose name I had helped carve into the wood of a staircase on a cold Christmas morning, 26 years ago, and I told him the truth. Because I needed to know, I said quietly, whether you would do it anyway. Owen closed his eyes. A second tear followed the first, and then a third, and then he stopped trying to hold them back entirely, and I stood in the room that Margaret and I had built, and watched my son cry for the things he had thrown away. And I did not look away because some things you have to witness completely even when it hurts. Nora put her hand on my arm. I covered it with mine. Outside, snow had begun to fall over the lake. The weeks after Christmas were quieter than I expected. Charges were filed in mid-January. Preston Hargrove faced counts of elder financial abuse, filing fraudulent documents, and using real property as unauthorized loan collateral. Dr. Raymond Fitch surrendered his medical license as part of a plea agreement with the DA's office, rather than face trial. Hargrove Development Group filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy before the end of the month. Owen and Sylvia were named as subjects of the ongoing investigation, not yet charged, but not yet clear either their fates moving through the legal system at the pace such things move, which is slowly and without mercy for impatience. I did not follow the proceedings closely. Diana kept me informed of what I needed to know, and I trusted her to tell me if something required my attention. The rest of it, the motions, the continuances, the back and forth of attorneys, I left to people who were paid to care about it. What I cared about was the house. Roy came up the first weekend of January and helped me hang the photographs back on the walls. We worked quietly and without hurrying, finding the right hooks, checking the levels, restoring each frame to something close to where it had always been. When we rehung the wedding photograph, Margaret and me outside the church in Folsom, her laughing, me looking at her instead of the camera, Roy stepped back and looked at it for a moment. "There she is," he said. "There she is," I agreed. We carried the hydrangea planters out of the storage shed, where Sylvia's crew had put them, and set them back along the bank, dormant and snow-covered, but alive underneath the way hydrangeas always are in winter, waiting rather than gone. I replaced the windows that had been removed. I rehung the coach lanterns Margaret had chosen. I did each thing slowly and deliberately, the way you do work that matters. Owen sent letters. The first few were defensive and difficult to read, full of explanations that collapsed under their own weight. But around the fourth letter, something changed. The explanations fell away, and what was left was simpler and harder. I knew what I was doing. I told myself it would be okay. I was wrong. I read every letter. I had not yet written back. I did not know if I would. Not because I was unwilling to forgive him. I understood in the particular way that fathers understand things, that forgiveness was not really a choice I had in this matter. It would come because it had to, because he was my son, and that did not stop being true, because he had done something terrible. But understanding and writing a letter are different things, and I was not ready yet to write the letter. Nora called every Sunday. She did not ask about Owen. She asked about the hydrangeas and the windows and whether I had gotten the dock repaired before the lake froze. She asked the right questions the way she always had. On the 24th of December, exactly 1 year after the night that had changed everything, I unlocked the front door of the lake house and held it open. The first guests arrived just after noon, 4 retired nurses who had driven up together from Sacramento in a minivan, laughing about the traffic on Interstate 80, arguing cheerfully about the best route through Auburn. Behind them came a family of 3, a man about Nora's age, his teenage daughter, and his elderly mother, all of them quiet in the particular way of people who are carrying loss and are grateful for somewhere to set it down for a while. I showed them to their rooms. I pointed out the kitchen, the firewood stacked on the back porch, the path down to the lake. The paperwork for the full charitable registration was still working its way through the county, Diana had stepped in as interim trustee administrator. In the meantime, a temporary arrangement until everything was properly formalized. What mattered was that the door was open and people were walking through it. By 3 in the afternoon, the fireplace was going, and someone had found the old box of ornaments in the hall closet, and the teenagers were decorating the tree with the same haphazard enthusiasm that Owen and Nora had once brought to the same task in this same room. Roy arrived at 4 with a casserole dish, and the information that he had shoveled the front walk without being asked, which was the most Roy thing anyone had ever done. Nora came at 5 still in her travel coat, her dark green scarf bright against the snow outside. She hugged me at the door for a long moment, then pulled back and looked at the room full of strangers becoming less strange, and her eyes went bright. "Mom would have loved this," she said. "I know," I said. After dinner, when the guests had settled and the fire had burned low, and the lake house had taken on the particular warmth of a place full of people who are beginning to feel safe, I slipped out through the back door onto the porch. The cold hit me cleanly sharp and dry, the kind of December cold that clarifies rather than numbs. The lake was dark and very still, the surface holding the reflection of the stars with the patient fidelity of something that has been doing this for a long time and intends to keep doing it long after everything else has changed. I set 2 chairs side by side at the edge of the porch, the way Margaret and I had always done. I sat in one. I left the other empty. From my jacket pocket, I took the photograph, Margaret and me, 1986, outside the church in Folsom, and I held it in both hands and looked at it in the starlight. She was laughing. I was looking at her. 26 years of marriage, and in one unguarded moment captured by someone who probably had no idea what they were recording. I had been keeping things for her. The house, the promise, the mornings. Now I was keeping something different. I kept it. I said quietly, to the empty chair, to the dark water, to whoever or whatever receives the words people say when they are alone and speaking to someone who is no longer there. But not the way either of us imagined. I didn't keep it for the family, because the family, some of it, turned out not to deserve it. I kept it for the people who need it. The ones who are tired. The ones who have been giving for so long, they've forgotten what it feels like to receive. The door behind me opened softly. Roy came out first, settling into the railing with his coffee. Nora came second, wrapping her coat tighter, standing beside my chair and resting her hand on my shoulder. From inside the house came the sound of voices, the retired nurses laughing at something, the teenager asking the elderly woman a question. Someone in the kitchen putting dishes away with the comfortable noise of people making themselves at home. "Margaret's home, and she would have been out here with you," Nora said softly. "I know," I said. She always said the best part of a party was the quiet afterward. Nora's hand tightened on my shoulder. I looked down at the bottom step of the porch stairs, where a new piece of oak had been fitted into the place where the old one had been. I had installed it myself in October before the guests arrived. On it, I had carved a single line beneath the space where the original inscription had been. "For those who need a place to rest, Christmas 2024. My son had taken the original piece of wood with him the night of December 24th. I did not know where it was now. I hoped he still had it. I hoped when he looked at it, he thought about the boy he had been before he made the choices he made, and I hoped that boy was still in there somewhere, still findable, still capable of being the person I had believed he was. That was all the hoping I had left to do on his behalf. The rest was his. Dad." Nora's voice was very quiet. "Are you okay?" I thought about that question, the way I had thought about it on the morning of December 24th, actually, honestly, without deflecting. "Not entirely," I said, "but I will be." She leaned down and pressed her cheek against the top of my head, the way she had as a small child when she climbed into my lap after a bad dream, before she was old enough to know that fathers could have bad dreams too. I put the photograph back in my pocket close to where the carved oak had been for so many weeks, and I sat in the cold December dark beside an empty chair and listened to the sounds of people finding rest inside the home that Margaret and I had built for exactly this, not for ownership, not for inheritance, not for any of the things that had nearly taken it away, for the mornings, for the people who needed them, for the love that built the walls and never asked for anything back. People ask me if I regret any of it. I don't, but I wish I had spoken sooner. I confused kindness with permission for too long. I kept opening the door until someone decided the door was theirs. Don't be like me. When generosity starts being treated as entitlement, say something. Early, clearly, before it's too late. I'm not a perfect father, but I believe God places the right people in the right spaces at the right time, and sometimes what feels like loss is actually redirection toward something better. These family stories, revenge, rarely look like what we imagine. What I felt wasn't revenge, it was restoration. If you've ever lived through family drama revenge in your own home, you know the difference between justice and bitterness. Choose justice. It costs more up front, but it's the only thing that actually heals. The hardest lesson: love should never be mistaken for weakness. And what you build with your own hands, your home, your dignity, your life, belongs to you. Protect it. These family stories, revenge end. And sometimes on the other side, there's a porch, a quiet lake, and a chair you keep empty for the one who made it worth building. If this moved, you drop a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Thank you for watching. Until the very end, it truly means everything. Gentle reminder, some stories on this channel include fictional elements created to illuminate real human truths. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Step away and find what speaks to your heart.